Welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the law firm of Abercrombie & Sanchez, PLLC. You can find us on the internet at astxlegal.com or by calling 1-888-981-7509. Your hosts are Brian Abercrombie and Samuel Sanchez. Brian has been practicing law for 18 years and is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in the area of family law. Sam has been practicing for 13 years, is licensed in both Texas and Florida, and is a certified mediator. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and all views are the opinion of the hosts. It is not designed to provide legal advice for your particular legal matter, and it should not replace the advice of competent counsel. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast.
Yep, you're in.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Top Texas Lawyers Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Abercrombie, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Sam Sanchez. Sam, how you doing?
I'm not doing too bad, man. I'm definitely your sidekick. Looking at like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I guess that makes me Sundance.
That's right. Anyway, so we're on today to talk a little bit. We're changing our format a little bit. Going to go with a little video podcast instead of the audio. But I guess you can find it on audio if you need to. But we thought we'd show your manly, good-looking features, Sam.
Yeah. Well, let's hope we don't scare too many people away. But hopefully we've got some great stuff to talk about, so that'll help.
Today we're going to be talking about small businesses and kind of the things to consider when opening a small business, because that seems to be a big topic of discussion for many people. Many people we see coming in, and people that I talk to, whether it's at my kids' baseball game or just passing them on the street or whatever, or clients coming in. They're starting small businesses. They want to know the ins and outs of small business. We have started a small business ourselves, so we've got some personal, real world experience with that, and we've got some helpful tips and advice on that too as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously COVID era, everybody's really considering a side hustle. Before, side hustles were like, how do you, kind of like add wealth, add income to the household, on something maybe that you're interested that isn't your like full-time career. But now in COVID, so many people are having to figure out like, okay, well, I'm starting an online business, or, as an example, my fiance, she's sitting there and she's created 2 new businesses, and these are all not just side hustles. These are actually things that she's investing a substantial amount of time. And so when you do that and they start to make money, you look at it and you say, wow, my side hustle is my primary hustle. What do I need to think about? What can affect me?
So the big question is, what happens when your side hustle becomes your primary business? That's really what we're talking about. I mean, you've got everybody, you've got stay-at-home moms that are no longer stay-at-home moms because their side hustle has become, this big money-making opportunity, whether it's selling vitamins or eyelashes or makeup, or there's so many different things out there in the market. Getting into the market is so much easier now than it probably ever has been with when it comes to social media and stuff like that. I mean, you've got people that are doing wraps on their cars. You've got people that are, you name it, people are out there hustling it. So, there's a lot of things to consider when opening a small business that, we kind of want to talk about.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, even, like, let's just talk about the internet and there's these social influencers, right? These social media guys and girls that are out there making tons of bank, basically just promoting product because they're so popular. They have so many people that are following them on a regular basis. So when you think about, okay, I'm starting to make money, or I anticipate that I'm going to make money, I want to just start out of the gates and create a business. What's important to consider? Well, first and foremost, I would tell you is really consider like what type of business you're going into. Is it going to have inventory? Is it going to be a personal service business? Because all these types of things are going to have implications about, one, how you create a business plan. You're going to talk, any banker that you go out to, if you're going to try to get a loan, is going to tell us, hey, what's your business plan look like? And that can be just really the structure of your business, how many employees, or what type of inventory am I going to order? Do I need to consider what type of liabilities? Are clients going to be coming to me? Is there going to be contractual implications of what we do? Thinking through that process will help you kind of start to ask the right questions.
Even people getting, Kickstarter loans, things like that for, setting up businesses, or, you see Shark Tank every week. I don't know if you watch Shark Tank, but I watch Shark Tank and they have some of the craziest inventions coming on there, and people getting money for small businesses and ventures that they're starting. And some of them get Kickstarter loans. You've got, my wife likes the Netflix series Cheer, and one of the girls on that show, apparently she's some kind of a social media influencer, and I think she was paid, I don't remember how much money, for just wearing an outfit that a company sent her and taking some pictures on Instagram and putting it out there. They gave her money to do it. I mean, there's so many different ways for people to make bank, as she said, these days. And there's a lot to consider when you're opening a small business. First and foremost, I mean, what's your plan for your business? Do you want it to be just you? Do you want to bring on employees? Do you want to bring on partners? How do you want that set up? The first thing to think about is how you want your business set up.
Yeah, and the big part of that too, Brian, is really why we're telling you to do this is because when you consider the types of entities that exist in the state of Texas and in Florida, they vary, right? But you could talk about it could be a sole proprietorship. I mean, basically, you're the only person in the company. You're the only person doing anything, making any money. But you could say, hey, you know what? Maybe I want to take on investors. Maybe a family member is going to bankroll me, or a buddy who's got money who's going to sit there and give me this loan, and they want an interest in the company because they believe in it, but they don't want to do anything. So is it a partnership? Is it a general partnership? Is it going to be a limited liability partnership, meaning that everybody only wants to expose what they put into the company? You don't want to have personal exposure. Or if you look at it beyond that, you're like, no way, I completely see this is a Shark Tank idea. This is an idea that if I take it forward, could make a ton of money. Maybe it's the basis, the foundation for a corporation. So I'm looking at it. Do I want a C Corp or an S Corp? There's just so many considerations to take about. Well, each one of them is going to insulate you in a different way depending on what you're trying to build.
One thing they always, kind of told us in law school is that when you're forming a business or you're talking to people about forming a business, the first things you need to consider are obviously there's three things. There's ownership, there's tax liability, and there's regular liability. So those are the three things you really need to consider when starting a business. A, who you want the owners to be and what do you want their interest to be. B, what do you want your taxes to look like? Because that's where a clever accountant comes in, and that becomes almost instrumental, as we found out. But then the third thing is, how do you want to limit your liability personally? I mean, a lot of that depends on the type of business that you're doing. If you're doing construction work, you're going to probably want to make sure you have limited liability. If you're doing office work, it's maybe less important depending on what it is. But those three things are the paramount considerations, at least starting out.
Sure. And I'll give you a good example, Brian, kind of along those lines and why it's important. I have a buddy who his side hustle was, in the summers, he had a little lawn company. Him and a couple of guys that he hangs out with would get their lawnmowers together, all their equipment, load up in a trailer. And they had a set number of clients during the summer that they would do yards for. And he was like, it's no big deal. Should I incorporate? Should I get an LLC going? Or, all we do is we split the money three ways. And I told him, well, yeah, that's a big problem because not only are you entering other people's property, but potentially you could cause damage. Sure enough, brother. I mean, it was like a week later, he calls me. He's like, you'll never believe it. I think you jinxed me. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, man, I'm freaking going on this person's yard. He goes, it kind of was wet the day before. He goes, and my lawnmower kind of got hung down. And so when I lifted it to push it back down, the blades caught one of their metal sprinkler heads. He goes, ripped the sprinkler all to crap. He's like, not only that, a piece of metal shot out and put a hole in the side of this kind of little barn that they had, but it was like a structure where they stored stuff. Kind of like a greenhouse, I guess is a better way, like a solarium. Anyways, so he's like, they got all kinds of mad, twisted up. So now they want me to fix their sprinkler system. He goes, well, who knows how much that's going to be? He goes, and they want me to fix this hole inside of their wall. Do I have to do that? And I was like, well, yeah, buddy, you do. He's like, well, man, I didn't sign up for any of that. All I'm doing is doing their yard. But these are the kinds of things that you really need to think through depending on the side hustle that you're creating, right? Because he had direct exposure. And I told him, I was like, now these three guys, you guys are just all doing it together. It's a company. He's like, yeah, we have a little bitty website, He goes, but we never thought about this kind of stuff. So I'd really encourage people to sit down and think through, and that's what's so important about this business plan stage, is really think through kind of what I'm going to do, because it'll help you get some good insight from an attorney or a CPA in relation to kind of things to look out for, pitfalls.
And just to give you a kind of a breakdown of a corporation is going to be, have a lot more formality. There's going to be typically multiple owners that are called shareholders, things like that. They're in potentially a different tax bracket if it's a larger corporation, but if it's a small one, maybe not. it's going to split profits like a corporation would split profits. You pay dividends to the shareholder or whatever the case may be, unless it's an S corp. But then you have a limited liability company that gives you the limited liability protection of a corporation. That's the big benefit of a corporation, is to have that limited liability protection. You're only liable up to your investment. So it could be, very, very limited, $1,000 even, less than that. With a limited liability company, you get that limited liability protection from a corporation, but you split profits like a partnership. So in the lawn company example that you just gave, those three guys could have formed an LLC, split profits the way they wanted to. Everybody gets a third, and then the limited liability protection would be limited based on having the LLC. But that sounds like that yard job went from a $50 getting paid to out of pocket $500 or something,
Yeah, it really was, and in that, what he wanted to do was, well, can I apportion it between my partners? Because they were all kind of like, well, hey, you know what, you're mowing that yard. And he was trying to say, well, yeah, but it's our business. So, these are the kinds of things, to your point, Bryan, that really you're going to want to sit down and think through with the individuals that are going to participate in ownership or execution of the responsibilities for that company. And to take it a step further, it can even talk about, like, there may be intellectual property considerations that you're going to want to look at. Your Shark Tank example is great. Somebody comes up with this fantastic $1 million idea, and you're at the inception phase. You're kind of looking at it like, hey, if I can create this, I used to always tell people, hey, you remember those cardboard windshield protectors? You put them on your windshield to keep the sun from beating down on you in Texas. I kept thinking, why didn't I invent that, man? If I'd invented that, I'd been a millionaire by now, right? But that $1 million idea, somebody puts together, and I guarantee you within 4 days of somebody seeing it, there's 100 different companies that are trying to copy it. So, these are things that you're going to want to talk to counsel or an attorney about as well. Is it this very unique idea that I'm going to base my company around? Do I need to look at, intellectual property protections? Do I need to copyright the idea? Do we need to have a trademark because it's so unique that everybody's going to want to wear it? Exactly. And so, these are really things that you're going to want to have a conversation with your attorney, with your partners, or anticipated partners or investors, to really kind of look at that. Because take it a step further, Bryan. So let's say somebody wants to give you money. You have a great uncle, he's loaded, and he wants to, bankroll you. He says, I'm going to give you $50,000, and I want you to do whatever you want to create this company with that $50,000. But 2 weeks into the business, he calls you and says, how are you using my $50,000? I really don't think you should invest that way. And you're like, well, you gave it to me. He's like, well, I invested it. And, as an investor, I should have a right, a say. Each one of these organizational types that Bryan talked about, the S Corp, the LLC, the sole proprietorship, the general partnership, they're all going to have structure behind them to say, you can invest, but what is the role you play? What do I get to say? In an S Corp, maybe we make him the treasurer. So what do you get to talk about? You get to sign the check. You get to account for the funds, right?
Come to the meeting and sign the check, right?
Right. Or am I a silent partner, meaning that we keep your money, but you don't get to say how the operation of the business goes? Or am I a general partner, where I have an equal say? So these are all things that you're going to want to kind of think through in relation to what you're trying to create.
And then also, depending on the type of business that you're operating, Texas does have a franchise tax that you have to, you're going to want to get with an accountant on. Then you're also going to want to get with an accountant on how you're federally taxed and how much tax you want to pass through and how much your company wants to pay and whatever tax structure you want to set up, because taxes are a huge consideration. Because let's say your business takes off and you start making money hand over fist, then you really got to start looking at these things. Am I doing, everything I need to do to maximize my benefits, and then making sure that I'm paying the proper amount of taxes at the same time. So there's a lot of considerations to talk with an accountant about, because that becomes a huge issue in a business. As we found out, you start making money quickly, then you need to start taking into account those considerations. If the business isn't making any money, then the tax liability is not going to be high. But if the business starts making money, then you're on a graduated scale on income taxes, and the graduated scale typically goes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a great CPA, kind of ties into a great back office structure. In any business that you're looking at and you say, hey, you know what I want to create, as we found out, you're going to want to really rely on the insight of individuals who have experience. Maybe it's experience in setting up a small business. Maybe it's an experience in kind of like we've talked about website design and SEO or marketing. Getting that kind of information. You may be brilliant about the absolute, thing that your widget, whatever widget you created, you may be the genius. But getting it out there into the hands of the right people, having the back office work correctly so you know how to take those offers or how to really analyze contracts that are being presented to you on these buy-sell agreements. These are all things that you're going to really want to get some advice on. And we found out, Brian and I obviously, that those were critical, hypercritical, even as attorneys, knowing that it's a personal service business that we're providing individuals as our insight, our professionalism, our guidance. We needed somebody in the background that could send somebody a bill, that could structure, like the internal processes and working mechanisms. And all that is something you really need to understand as you're creating this entity to be successful.
You definitely don't want to get behind when it comes to, organizing your books, organizing income, cash flow, expenses, all of those kinds of things. The reason why the majority of startup businesses fail is not because they don't have, they don't have drive and they don't have ingenuity and they don't have a great idea. It's because all of the I don't want to say red tape, but for lack of a better word, red tape kind of bogs them down after a while because you've got so many things to consider. I mean, as the owner, you have to consider marketing. You have to consider tax implications. You have to consider expenses. If you have employees, you got to consider salaries and benefits and unemployment insurance and workman's compensation insurance and all of those kinds of things that have to be considered, that helps your idea, your $1 million idea get to the forefront.
Yeah. And, as we've talked about and we've found out, Brian, like when you talk about an entity, a creation, it's a working, living, breathable document, this business plan that you're going to have, because as you start to execute it and grow and become successful, you may go from, one person mowing lawns to 5-person mowing lawns. And if they're contract employees, then how are you going to pay them? Do you need a payroll company? And so, don't think of it as this static thing that you created, this kind of like 10-point list. You're like, okay, now I feel ready. No, it's going to be something that you're going to continually revise and review with your attorney, with your CPA, with your partners, so that you're constantly evolving that business. Because all these side hustles that we're talking about, whether it's a husband or a wife or a sister or whoever's creating these that are now becoming in this COVID era a primary source of income, then you want to insulate that income as much as you possibly can. And that's really where you go into this phase about determining, because you may start off and you're just like, hey, look, I'm just a sole proprietorship. I'm not going to call it anything. I'm just working for myself to make money. But now it's getting bigger, and I need to consider the implications that you just talked about, Brian, the tax implications. Do I want it flowed through to me only? Do I want to be able to divide out those tax implications? Do I want to be able to shelter some of these funds and have like some tax shelters based on the way I'm using expenses? Do I need to create separate accounts, and what are the implications of that? All these are going to be considerations that you need to have conversations about as you encounter them. If not, the very best option is obviously in advance of creating that entity.
Right, and a lot of these ideas take off pretty quick. So you have to, we have a client that's potentially starting a very particular type of cleaning company, and that thing has the potential to go nuclear. And he's talking about one van, one or two employees. That thing has the potential to be astronomical very quickly. So he's got to come up with a solid plan for investors. He's got to come up with a solid plan for business and how he's going to expand and how he's going to, take on every business is a risk. Every business you take a risk, obviously, with your money, with your time, everything. But he's got to allocate, okay, how much risk do I expose myself to if I want to get 5 trucks, or if I want to, expand this thing rapidly? What's my sales contract going to look like? What's my, customer base? How am I going to get my, my brand to my customers? I mean, the biggest, obviously the biggest advertising, is obviously internet these days. This used to be the phone book back in dinosaur times where I'm from.
Phone book, Brian, phone book.
But now it's the internet. So, I mean, you've got to figure out, how do I navigate Google? They have their own, it's its own world out there. The world of advertising on the internet is its own world, and Google, Google has the lion's share of the market right now.
Yeah, and and I guess I would encourage the people who are listening or are contemplating, I'm gonna create this entity, this business, and I want it to be flexible as it grows. You just got to remember, look, whatever you create, it can be changed, right? It may obviously require an attorney, and I would encourage you to contact an attorney to kind of help walk you through the options. But you may start out a sole proprietorship and then say, hey, you know what? Now, based on the performance of my business and the money that we're making, or the type of business that we have and the potential risk exposure, maybe I need to consider an LLC so that I limit my personal exposure. And I'll give you a good example of this. I have a buddy who, Brian and I are pretty big gun enthusiasts, and so he started a reload business. So he would collect brass from this local shooting range, and he would reload. And then he would, put these out like just to people that he knew. He was like, hey, yeah, I reload this. If you want some shells, swing by. I'll give them to you dirt cheap at cost for what I have to do it. Well, we were having this conversation one day, and he was like, hey, man, I'm going to send you a bunch of shells, a bunch of bullets. And I'm like, all right. And I'm like, well, are you doing this like for other people? And he's like, yeah, but I mean, I'm only doing it like for friends, family, people that I know, but people have paid me for them. And I'm like, that's a business. I was like, there's some potential liability that you have in exposure. And he's like, well, why would I? I'm like, what if a reload goes bad? What if somebody has, an accident in relation to one of those bullets that you sold, and who do you think they're going to come back to? You think they're going to go to the firing range and say, hey, well, that discarded brass that you sold this guy, you're at fault? I said, no, they're going to come back to you because you actually are the person who delivered it. He's like, even as a gift? I said, potentially even there. I said, so, a business transaction, it sounds like most of the time people want to say, well, a business transaction is always based on money. But you and I both know, Brian, that it could be a barter situation. Hey, you know what?
Absolutely.
You give me your eggs and I'll give you my bullets. Oh yeah, sure. I'll take them out of my chicken hen coop. And guess what? You just formed a contract. You just had an exchange of services. And so, that could expose you in a lot of different ways. And he was looking at it thinking like, well, it's no big deal. Maybe I'm going to turn it into a business. And as we had the conversation more and more, he was like, yeah, I think I definitely want to have, very limited liability on what I'm doing. So then we had to look at potential waivers. We had to look at his contracts and the terminology that was inside the contract that really expressed, what type of risk he was going to be willing to accept and how much he was going to try to push off to the person who was getting these. And so those are the kinds of conversations you really need to have with an attorney, with the CPA, to kind of like limit your exposure. Personally, nobody wants to go into a business, make a bunch of money, step on a landmine, and then all of a sudden have everything, not just what you put into the business, but everything else that they've worked for, be exposed.
And look, I mean, a consultation with an attorney to discuss your business plan and your idea, it can be part of the startup cost of your business. A consultation with an attorney is be anywhere from free to a couple $100, and it's probably well worth your time to have that at least consultation to discuss the issues so that you know what you're walking into. I mean, where at least some potential landmines are, because it's much more expensive to step on one than it is to avoid them altogether. And look, they can even, an attorney can walk you through how you file documents with the state and how you, potentially can go get sales tax certificates or, certificates of occupancy or different licenses that you might need depending on what type of business you had. So when you're talking about your side hustle going global, I mean, there's a lot more to consider. I mean, maybe there's some sort of regulatory body that might cover your particular line of work that you need to get involved in. Whereas if you're just selling haircuts at your house, you don't necessarily need a cosmetology license. I don't know for sure whether you would need one or not, but if you open a hair salon, you definitely do, right?
Definitely do. Yeah, definitely.
If you give your friend a haircut at home, you may not, but
right.
If you're opening up a hair salon, you probably do. So those are the kinds of things that it's important to talk to counsel about.
Sure. Yeah. And, even as an individual, and I will give this as an example, because I think a lot of times when people are thinking about forming these businesses or, a great example of an individual, my son. My son is super creative. Like he got that from his mom because clearly, I have.
It really is.
Yeah. But he writes songs, he writes poetry, now he's writing a book. And so, he would sit down and he would just write this book and he would like email it all over the place. He'd be like, hey, I want you to check this out. He'd record it, him and his buddies, his band, and they'd send this stuff out. And I'd be like, hey, what happens if somebody really likes that and they take it and they record it? And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, I would love that. That would be great. I was like, well, you don't want to get paid for it? And he's like, well, of course I want to get paid for it. I would get paid for it. I mean, how are they going to do it otherwise? I'm like, because you've done nothing to protect it, right? And so these are the kinds of things that's really simple, but you just don't know what's going to turn into something great, something that's really worth a lot of money. And so these side hustles or these primary hustles that people are working on now, I'd really encourage you to, think about the long-term goals that you have for it. And if you say, hey, man, I just want to make money, I want to be able to provide for my family and pay my bills. Well, great. Then that means you want to insulate the money that you're making from not only Uncle Sam, if you can, right, but also from other individuals trying to take it from you. And so
I had a client one time that he built this particular type of physics device called a Statapult that was used for measurement. And I had to look it up to see what a Statapult actually did. But he built them and he sold them to to physics students and different things. And he sold probably 2,000 to 5,000 units a year. And so it was a fairly decent sized business that he had going. Well, a big company came in and they said, well, we've got the market cornered on Statapults, and we've got you're copying our design, and you're this and you're that, and we want you to cease and desist, or we're going to sue you for $250,000. Well, he didn't have $250,000 to pay these people, and not only that, they weren't right. They didn't have the market cornered on Statapults, but they were they had a particular type of Statapult that was similar to his. So we had to write a real nasty letter back to him saying, basically go jump in the lake because we've been in business longer than you. We've had this Statapult, longer than you have. And you know what? You might be looking at a counter lawsuit if you try to sue us because there is no copyright on a Statapult apparently. At least there wasn't then. There may be now. But the point being, you might get competitors coming in and trying to tank your business because you make a better mousetrap.
Yeah, or flip it, Brian. You may come up with the greatest idea in the world, and somebody wants to copy it. And so instantly You're like, how do I protect my idea? So these are all things that a lawyer can absolutely help you with. And a good, strong plan will ensure that even if it does happen, you have recourse. You have the ability to go in and protect the asset that you created with your hard work.
Right. You might need something as complex as a patent, or you might need something as simple as a trademark or a copyright. And depending on what it is, if it's intellectual property, depending if it's an invention, whatever the case may be. That's why Shark Tank is so interesting, because you got these people coming in there with these $1 million ideas, and the first thing the sharks usually ask them is, hey, is that patented? Hey, what is the patent on something like that? And they're, oh yeah, we got this patent pending and blah blah blah. So you've the first thing an investor is going to want to know is how protected is my investment in this situation.
Yeah, and in that, you want clear responsibilities spelled out in your plan as well. And what I mean by that is in relation to, let's say you're going to establish a partnership, right? So is it equal responsibility? Is it that a partner's going to have certain responsibilities that are set up for themselves, and you're not going to have to mess with those? Is it that you're going to need, a treasurer or a director of operations? Is it that you're going, what are their roles? What are their responsibilities? What does their compensation look like? As it continues to grow and you're adding employees, maybe you have to look at it and say, well, doggone, do I need an employee handbook? What are the laws and the rules that I need to have in place to be able to determine something? Because as an example, you're sitting there and you say, hey, my employee went out and did something that I didn't authorize. As an example, your example about the cleaning company, somebody goes out and drives the company van, and then all of a sudden, bam, they're in a wreck. Well, who's liable? Obviously, do you have that, insurance? Well, is that employee whose contract or at will, are they on the policy? These are all things that you're going to.
A good plaintiff's attorney will sue everybody and then let the defendants out as necessary, right?
Absolutely. And, so these contracts that you're creating, these formations, these business entities, they're all going to have those type of potential exposure. And you want to really think through that and have some good advice to help you kind of really navigate shark infested waters to kind of take that Shark Tank.
Yeah. Do you need a company insurance policy? Do you need, a company insurance policy insuring drivers? The point you made on the employee handbook is a very, very important one, because you want to make it absolutely clear what your employees can and can't do, and you want to make it absolutely clear what you will discharge an employee for doing. Because what you don't want to have happen is a bunch of employees out there breaking the law, whatever the case may be, whether that's, harassment or stealing or whatever, and then come to find out they start looking at the company and, oh, you didn't have any procedures in place to tell employees that it wasn't okay to steal. that it wasn't okay to, to rob people blind or whatever the case may be. And then they're looking at you for liability because A, you hired an employee who was a thief, and B, you didn't have any protocols in place to get rid of an employee that was a thief.
Yeah. And there's not, not only that, but let's say your company's getting big and you're having employees in multiple states. Brian and I found out, obviously, you're employing other people in other states. We've represented companies that say, hey, do I have to maintain insurance policies for, an employee who's in another state based out of Texas? Well, yeah, you may have to. And these are the kinds of things that, you're going to encounter as you're creating these new entities, these businesses that start to take off and grow. And so you're really going to, I can't stress enough that you're going to want to surround yourself with people who know what they're doing, who can give you some valuable insight to kind of help guide you.
Right. And that time spent with a lawyer drafting a policies and procedures manual or corporate formation document is going to be time well spent, because you do it once and it's right. I mean, you can tweak it later on as you grow or whatever, but it's going to survive for a long, long time in most instances.
Yeah. And I'll take this moment to just kind of really dissuade people from considering these like online legal forms. Okay. Can you use a legal form? Yes. You don't like LegalZoom? Well, here's the problem that I have with LegalZoom is a lot of these really don't come with licensed advice from an attorney who's been doing this practice in the state in which you're creating these entities. And so what you're getting really is, it's like giving somebody a firearm that's loaded and saying, you'll be fine. I'm not going to tell you how to unload it, how to discharge it, how to aim it, how to clean it, how to care for it. But by God, you'll be fine. Just take it.
They might tell you they might tell you which end the bullet comes out of, though. They might tell you that. No, that's a good example, because I did have a client that came in one time and had a business dispute with a partner and showed me this partnership agreement that they had come up with, I think off of LegalZoom or one of those online sites where you can download and buy partnership documents. Well, the thing had so many blanks in it, I didn't know who owned what. It didn't say who owned what. And, you kind of have to default to the partnership laws of the state of Texas, which according to what he was telling me, that's not what they intended at all. And that's not what, what he wanted to have happen. But he doesn't have a legally enforceable contract or a legally enforceable document that he can go to a court and say, this is the agreement that we had, and this is how this particular person breached that agreement. You got to be real careful with doing your own legal work. I guess it's kind of like me doing my own dental work. It's very risky and it's going to hurt a lot, right?
Yeah, those pearly whites, you want to take care of them, Brian. You want to take care of them. No, I agree. I think that, we always talk to clients. We try to give them the best advice possible, put them in the best situation. And if you don't know, you need to find somebody who does know. A lawyer is going to be able to help give you those answers or point you in a direction, get you the right answers and create the right things that are going to help your business be in the right place.
Just know that, you probably have a great plan and you probably have a great idea in mind, and you're probably motivated to sell it, and you're probably pretty good at it. But there is a lot of, you just don't get discouraged. And there's a lot of different, scenes on the web, I guess, so to speak, when you're looking at this. You got a marketing aspect, a tax aspect, a liability aspect, a profit aspect, an investment aspect, a partnership aspect, maybe not. So you got to just look at all of these different webs that you have to kind of, don't lose your passion for the project or for the passion for the business that you have, because it's probably a great idea. And people love passion, and people love, people that come to you with passion and they're selling a product and that they really believe in. But just know that, you can love what you do and you can love what you sell, but don't get derailed by, all of the kind of red tape that goes along with that. It can be a tricky minefield, and you can stumble, but there are people out there, accountants, lawyers, all types of people, marketing people even, that can help you, bring your business idea to the forefront.
Yeah, and in that, you just want to have clear responsibilities and roles, what you're paying for, what you're going to get at the end of the day, and what we always, the neighborhood that I came from was probably a little rougher than Brian's neighborhood, but they'd always say hustlers don't get hustled, right? And so you really want to kind of have that as a mantra as you're creating this business, is that you're going to hustle. You're going to put your blood, sweat, and tears into something that you want to build, that you want to be profitable, that you want to make, and maybe you pass on to your children later on. The way to do that is to have all this created correctly. to really surround yourself in a way that insulates all the work that you're putting into it and all the profit that you hope to get out of it in the best way possible. And so to your point, Brian, I mean, that's really knowing and having a good working relationship with an attorney who can guide you, a CPA that can help you avoid kind of the tax pitfalls. Maybe it's a tax attorney who assists you there. Is it a web designer? Is it an SEO company, marketing company, whatever it may be? These are all individuals that you want to kind of think through, and a lawyer can really help guide you to say, hey, look, consider talking to a person about X, Y, or Z. They may not have the answer as far as like, who do I send you to, but they can sure tell you, hey, you're going to need some back office stuff. You're going to need a contract that really spells out X, Y, and Z so you don't get burned. So if you don't get paid, you have recourse to be able to give me the foundation to be able to go in and get your money or get your product back because they didn't, fulfill their end of the contract.
And the way to get a hold of us, we do this sort of thing, and we counsel, potential, startup businesses all the time. And the way to get a hold of us, we have a website, www.astxlegal.com. And my phone number directly is 281-374-4741. I'm Bryan Abercrombie, one half of the Abercrombie & Sanchez law firm. And Sam, how do they get a hold of you?
Sure. Yeah, you can hit me up. My cell is 817-914-5470. That's my direct line. You can just hit the office at 469-844-7181. You can send me an email directly at ssanchez@astxlegal.com. And obviously, we want all you hustlers to really hustle, right? Make the money, become super huge. We just want to help you get there. If it's not us, it's okay. Find a lawyer. Make sure you talk to somebody that's going to really help guide you in creating the right entity to make sure that your business goes where you want it to go.
We definitely want to say we knew you win.
That's right. We knew you win. We knew you win.
So just to give you kind of a heads up on future episodes, we are going to be talking about a topic that unfortunately, has been in the news a lot lately. It's the topic of, firearms and self-defense and personal property, and what, kind of what your rights and what your responsibilities are with respect to that. So we'll be bringing that to you next week. We're going to try to bring a guest on, talk about a criminal defense attorney probably that will help us, navigate a tricky minefield when it comes to firearm use and self-defense law and things like that. So look forward to that. We'll be looking forward to speaking to you again, Sam, next week. And thank you again for all your wonderful insight.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Brian. Take care, brother.
Take care.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the Top Texas Lawyers podcast. If you would like a consultation with either Brian or Sam, please call 1-888-981-7509 or visit us on the web at astxlegal.com. Once again, that's astxlegal.com. Thank you very much.